Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, I've got a plant to share with you that checks all the boxes. We learn about some updated fact sheets. Mark Bays shares with us about a tree preservation process that happened at the state capitol. And then join me back here in the garden as we reevaluate the winter damage on our plants. So often in the spring when we start planting our landscape, we're looking for a plant that will check all of those boxes. And today we have one that checks most of them. In fact, it is native. It is hardy from zones 4 to 9, which means it covers most of the U.S., major continental U.S. It can be used in the container as well as the landscape. It has early spring blooming flowers that can also be used for cut flowers to bring into your home. Now, the foliage also comes in a range of variegations, which add a nice interest throughout the garden. Now, the foliage also is evergreen. Today we're going to talk about Heucheras, and this is one that you're probably familiar with. This particular hybrid is called Purple Palace. While it's an oldie, it is a goodie. It was chosen as the perennial plant of the year back in 1991. You can see that it has kind of that dark leaf. Now, under more exposure to the sun, it's going to start kind of lightening up and become more of a bronzy green color. Down here we have one that is kind of the one to compare for the dark foliage, and this one's called Obsidian, and it's actually one that a lot of the dark Heucheras or coral bells are compared to. Now, the nice thing about this one in comparison to the Purple Palace is it's actually going to hold its color regardless of the sun exposure. The other thing you might notice about the leaf margins is they're a little bit more scalloped or rounded, which kind of gives you a little bit of a different texture. Some Heucheras, such as Frosted Violet, have more of a serrated edge. Now, Frosted Violet's going to get a little bit taller at 2 feet in height and spread. It has silver purple foliage with dark venation and offers soft pink flowers that really pop against that dark foliage. As we continue looking at some of those darker colored Heucheras, we have one here called Dark Secret. Now, this is one you're going to want to put in a little bit more shade because with more sun exposure, it will lose a little bit of this color. But I really like this color because it's not only a dark purple, but it actually has sort of a really dark emerald color to the leaf as well. But what's nice is underneath it maintains that darker burgundy color. So with our Oklahoma winds that make those leaves kind of blow around, you're going to see those flashes of color against each other. The other thing you'll notice on the margins of this particular leaf is that they tend to be a little bit more ruffled, again showing you some of that dark burgundy color underneath there. Now we have another one that's starting to lighten up the garden a little bit, and this particular one is called Silver Gumdrop. Now you can see it has more of an iridescent sheen to the leaf, and it's also going to be topped with more of these flower panicles that add a nice little color. Now, all of these coral bells or Heucheras have this kind of dainty flower to them, which adds a little bit of fun cheerfulness to the garden, but really it's the foliage that's going to persist throughout the season that gives you such that color impact in your landscape. Now, if you want to highlight your garden even more, we've got a few more to take a look at. Now, as we follow that color spectrum, you can always add more color into your garden by getting some of the Heucheras that have some reds and yellows in them. So here in front of us, we have one called Galaxy. You can see it's losing some of that darker burgundy color and trading it in for more of a hot pink color as the leaves are mottled with splashes of hot pink on it. There's also one called Georgia Peach, which shows more venation. In fact, it kind of looks like artwork, like somebody has actually taken a pencil and drawn the veins on those leaves. It's quite nice, actually. So here we have another one that's going to bring more of that red color, and this one's called Magma. And the nice thing about it is you're going to get a little bit more height on it, as it will top out about 2 feet with the flowers extending that reach up to 3 feet. Again, they're going to be those nice kind of airy panicles of small dainty flowers. We also have one here behind us called Caramel. Now this one, as you can see, we're starting to get a little bit lighter, so it's going to go more into those apricot and copper tones with only a few of the darker burgundy leaves to it. Now Caramel was actually discovered as a seedling, and they're not quite sure of the lineage, but they think it might be Heuchera villosa. And Heuchera villosa is actually a native to southeastern US. And because of that, any of the hybrids from it tend to be a little bit better adapted to hot, humid climates. Another Heuchera you might check into is Citronelle. It also was discovered as a support of this Caramel, meaning that that lineage is also more adapted to the humid, hot conditions. So as you can see, there are quite a range of colors that you can add into your landscape using Heucheras. And we've only just begun to touch on some of the introductions that have been made over the last couple of decades. Because there are so many new introductions, there's actually more hybrids on the market now than there are actual species. But all of these hybrids, for the most part, have been made by 5 species that are native to North America. Now, depending on the lineage of those hybrids might depend on how well they do in, say, sun or shade. Because of those 5 species, some are more adapted to like rocky conditions and some are more adapted to the woodland conditions. And unfortunately, we don't always know the lineage of some of our hybrids. Now you can see here, most of ours are planted in dapple sun or shade garden, which is an appropriate environment for most of your Heucheras. So if you're questioning the lineage or the environment to put them in, you might look at sort of a shade garden. Now in the shade, they can actually handle a drier soil condition, which is actually a really nice environment, considering oftentimes in the shade garden, we tend to have more root competition for that moisture. If you're going to push them into the sunlight, you want to give them a little bit more moisture, especially in those summer months. So the nice thing about Heucheras is they really work well transitioning from that sun to the shade garden. And while we often think of hostas in the shade garden, Heucheras are a nice companion plant to those hostas. And even more beneficial than just those hostas is the fact that this herbaceous foliage will persist all winter long.
During the year, I frequently get inquiries about many landscape and garden subjects. And one of them that I frequently get is about turf grasses. And oftentimes people are wondering, what's the best variety of turf grass to grow? And there are so many out there that it's really kind of difficult to recommend one over another. And we've trialed so many as well. And believe it or not, most of them that we have had through our trials have performed well in Oklahoma. So for the most part, you really can't go wrong. If you go to the garden centers, the retail stores, and looking for seed of turf grasses, then you're probably going to be, okay for the most part. We've released some varieties of Bermudagrasses through OSU over the years, so you can look for those. Those are great selections as well. Another question I often get is, where do I find this stuff? Or most importantly, where do I get sod from? Because a lot of people like to use sod instead of seeding, which is great. It's quicker. And so the nice thing is we have this great sod source directory available to you through Extension. And you can get it online or you can get it through your county extension offices. This one is CR 6605. Well, it's a 2014 Spring Oklahoma Turf Sod Source Directory. And so don't let the 2014 spring fool you. We update this pretty regularly, but one of the things is that most of the information here does not change very often either. So we can go 2 or 3 years without updating it, and the information is generally pretty good. But the nice thing about this is it tells you who produces sod in the state, and whether they are commercial or retail. Most of them do sell commercial, but some may have some retail options for you as well. They also tell you what varieties that they sell or are available. So from all of the turf grass species, from Bermudagrass to buffalo grass, to the cool season grasses, zoysia grass, all of these are in here. And they tell you which varieties that they have. And so you can look up a variety if that's what you're interested in, and go to the number that's next to that variety, or the numbers, and that'll tell you which producers offer that. And it tells you all of the varieties that they sell. It also tells you what kind of services they provide. So some of them don't, not only do they have the sod, but they also offer installation services versus, seeding versus sod. They may offer other services as well. So all of that information can be found in this fact sheet or the circular. So there's also a sod source directory for buffalo grass too. So if you're interested in buffalo grass, we have one for that as well. Another fact sheet or a publication that I think you will be very interested in is this one is called the Bermudagrass Lawn Management Calendar. We have several fact sheets on managing and installing and selecting turf grasses, and you can get those through Extension. But this one's a simple one. It just gives you a calendar of activities, and it tells you when to dethatch if that's necessary. It talks about fertilization and when to apply fertilizer, watering and how much to apply, pest management, weeds and insects, etc. And then it gives you some additional detailed information. So it's just a simple one-page front and back fact sheet or circular that's available. This one is called Bermudagrass Lawn Management Calendar, and it's L441. And then we also have one that's a cool season lawn management calendar, and that is L442.
Well, here we are standing outside the newly renovated visitor center of the Oklahoma State Capitol, and it's something that we all can be so very proud of. It's been a long process over the last couple of years, and it's really something beautiful that everybody should come and look at. But when you're walking up to the visitor center, there's a special tree that's just along the way that the Capitol Preservation Committee, they wanted to do everything possible to make sure that this significant tree on the southeast corner lawn was protected. Well, you might ask, this is just an elm tree, just looking at it from the surface, but no, this is a very special elm tree. It's an Ulmus alata, it's a winged elm, but it's a wingless winged elm. It's the largest wingless winged elm really in this part of the city. But that's the reason why they took such great care in this, is it's just not another elm tree, it's a wingless winged elm, and it's a beautiful specimen. So whenever you have a living tree around any existing construction zone, there's a lot of things that you need to consider. And State Capitol Parks did a wonderful job. They partnered with Oklahoma Forestry Services, and they came out and asked us how much space was needed around the tree. So first and foremost, we had to set up a tree preservation zone. And if you look around the canopy of the tree right now, you can see exactly where that undisturbed area was around this entire tree. So once we set up that critical root zone around the tree, we began working with the designers and engineers, because some of the original designs showed this sloping walkway that leads you down to the visitor center much closer to the original tree. So they had to go back and do some redesigning of the whole entranceway into the visitor center during those early times, and finally it all came together. So one of the first things that we had to do was set up that tree preservation fence around the construction area. Once we did that, some of the earliest things that we did years ago we went up and did some root pruning. So it's important to allow all the construction people their place to do their work. So they did some deep root trenching early on, and this was a year in advance of any of the construction that was going on. And after they trenched it as deep as 4 and 5 feet deep, we went in with sharp instruments and cut a nice clean cut on the side of the tree. And that way, when it's backfilled, all that new growth can come out much easier. So that's one of the first things that we did a couple of years before construction started. So with the construction of the new visitor center, it was now going to be in the basement of the Capitol complex. And they had to do this sloping area down to where the visitor center door was going to be. So whenever you excavate away from the tree, you're going to have exposed soil. So they had to design a retaining wall system in place where the slope was mild. They could actually use a concrete slurry. But on the north side, where it was just 15 feet down, they needed something much more rigid to hold that soil in place. So they actually had to design a pier system where they drove these piers as deep as 20 feet into the ground and then put a wall system in between there to hold that soil in place while they were building the visitor center. And that's something that wasn't originally designed into it. Manhattan Construction Company has been really wonderful throughout this whole process. You really have to improvise. So your original idea might not be the best idea, and I got to give them credit because whenever a problem came up, they were so willing to work with us and to work with all the other engineers to make sure that it was a success. And throughout the whole construction period within this tree preservation area, they did a really good job of watering the entire root system around here. So completely within the fence area, this tree just didn't even know that anything was going on outside, because just on the outside of that tree preservation zone, there was heavy equipment coming in and out. It was heavily compacted gravel all through there. Towards the end of the project, when they were pulling out all that construction area, taking away all the gravel, they were going to have to resod that area. They had to pull all that out, bring in new topsoil, bring in new turf. And then around the tree itself, even though it was protected, we wanted to take that extra step to decompact the soil around the tree. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but the one way we did it is with an air spade machine, where we trenched out, much like a spoke of a bicycle, in set increments around the tree, and then we brought in organic material and replaced that. So what that was able to do is it decompacted that soil, because we all know that all living things need air in their soil to grow through. And so that was just an added step that we did to make sure that those roots can continue to grow into that new uncompacted soil. And that's something that we're going to go back and do in another year or so. You know, this was a really great project that a lot of people were interested in making sure that this tree survived this construction. Now that you've seen the whole story, I think the next time that you visit the state capitol and you're walking down that ramp into the visitor center, just take a look at that large elm tree that's just on the southeast side there. And now you'll know everything that they did possible to make sure that that tree is going to give us years and years of beauty. If you're doing any kind of construction project around your home, whether it's a patio, whether it's a new addition to your home, whether it's anything like that, that you're disturbing the soil close to existing trees, there are some things that you can do to make sure that tree is going to be able to survive whatever it is that you're doing. Get a hold of Oklahoma Forestry Services. We'll be happy to give you some guidelines. So just there are so many resources out there that you can go to look for, to see about if you're doing construction around living things like trees, there are some things that you need to do beforehand, during, and afterwards to make sure you have the greatest chance of success.
This past February, we had a deep freeze, and when that happened, a lot of people were concerned about the effects that it would have on our landscape. And I was concerned too, but really the only thing we could do was to wait and see. Well, we're a few months away from that February freeze, and the temperatures have warmed up as well as the soil temperatures. So we're starting to see some life come back into our plants. Now, it might not be full on like we normally expect, and so that's what we're going to do, is evaluate some of those plants in our landscape to determine what we need to do. In some cases, we can cut them back, and unfortunately, in some cases, that means pulling those plants out. And in some cases, it means that they actually came through just fine and regrew just as good as they always do. Today, we're looking at Aucuba here in front of me. We've also got some Abelias, Nandinas, and Mahonia, and all of these really are going to be treated in the same manner. They typically are an evergreen plant, and as you can see, a lot of that foliage did get burnt back. Now, in this particular one, the Aucuba, if we're looking at it, you can see where there's definitely some dead tissue as it's all black. You can also see where there is still green viable tissue. Unfortunately, on most of this, the green stems, we're not really seeing any regrowth. Where we're seeing the growth come back from is down at the base of this plant. So for this situation, what we're going to go ahead and do is take this plant all the way back, leaving this new growth to regenerate and fill in. And that's what we're going to do on a lot of our plants. But first we'll tackle this one here. Now that we've got our Aucubas cleaned up here, one thing you want to be careful of is make sure you're not throwing away any of your plant labels. So if you have removed any of your branches and those are still attached, make sure you've got that written down, take a picture of it or something so that you remember what these plants are in your garden before those head to the compost pile. So next here we've got some Abelias. Again, you can see that there's some regrowth coming up here on top, but it's very little amount of regrowth. The majority of it is all dead tissue. There's a lot more regrowth down at the base of the plant where it stayed warmer. So at this point, we're going to take all of these back to the ground. You can see there's about 3 large ones, and that's just going to give it a more regenerative pruning as well, and also help maintain that size of that plant. So we've got a lot of the dead cleaned out of these shrubs here, and we're going to treat our Mahonias and our Carya japonica the same way. You also might find that your crepe myrtles have died back, and if you're already starting to see regrowth coming up from the base, then it's time to go ahead and prune those all the way back to the ground too, and allow that new growth to continue to rejuvenate the plant. You might find that in some locations your crepe myrtles are still regrowing from the top, in which you don't necessarily have to prune them. It depends on, again, the location around the state and also the microclimate. I've seen on different sides of the building where some crepe myrtles have died all the way back to the base, and then on the other side of the building, they're still regrowing from the top. It just depends. So now over here you can see we have an Indian hawthorn, and there's actually part of this plant that's still alive around the base that was naturally covered by the organic matter and the leaf litter that was there over the winter months. But for the bulk of it, you can see that it is kind of dead. And because we are at a botanical garden, we obviously want to put our best foot forward and make it pleasant for everyone to enjoy aesthetically. And so here we're sort of evaluating the plant and have determined that it's just best to go ahead and remove it because it is a slow grower. So we're going to remove this one. Now, if this was in your backyard and you wanted to go ahead and wait and you didn't want to purchase another plant and you want to invest time rather than money, there's no reason you couldn't prune this back and try to wait for it to regrow. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Now, some of the other plants that we are seeing around the garden showing effects are live oaks and our Nelliar Stevens. We're excited to see they are regrowing and they're starting to push out new leaves. So even though they were evergreen, they turned brown, we're seeing new growth come back out on those. So those we don't have to do anything to. Now on herbaceous plants, our cannas are actually coming back. I know, especially in northern Oklahoma, some people might have lost their cannas. Again, depending on how aggressive of a stand those cannas were, and also how much debris was maybe covering and mulching those cannas through that freeze. Another plant that we're seeing that didn't do so well are our azaleas. Here in north central Oklahoma, they didn't seem to come out of it so well, and we saw a lot of loss from them. However, I know over in Tulsa they had a beautiful spring display of azaleas. So again, it depends on where you were in the state as to those freeze temperatures and how long exposure they might have had to those cold temperatures. Another plant that we have struggled with seeing regrowth on is our deodar cedars, unfortunately. They are still not looking good, so it looks like that they might need to be pulled as well. But just keep in mind that if you have plants kind of like our Indian hawthorn that we're going to go ahead and take out, or our deodar cedars, that every time you have to pull a plant, that's just an opportunity to plant something new. There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead. Next week on Oklahoma Gardening, as we turn the calendar, we will share horticulture tips for June. We visit a productive cool season vegetable garden in Walters, Oklahoma, and catch up on pruning and training our espalier trees. To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussion on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and Tulsa Garden Club.